Welcome to Signs of Life, exploring survival of consciousness. Brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation on the web at www.foreverfamily.
Along with my co-hosts Bob and Phran Ginsberg.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening, Phran.
Hi.
How are you?
Great tonight.
Did you have a good week?
Oh, it's been fabulous.
I know you've been working really hard with foundation stuff, Phran.
Oh, yeah, we've got lots of things cooking.
You
lots
really
of things
do.
coming up.
I know, and we're going to be talking about that shortly. How are you, Bob?
Pretty good.
You've been a little busy fraternizing with some of the scientists, I understand.
Oh, somebody's got to do it.
I know. It's a tough job, right? Well, I know that we have one of your, well, I know you'll be embarrassed if I call him a colleague, so someone that you've discussed the work with that's going to be a guest on today. Do you want to tell our listeners about our guest for pretty much the hour?
Yeah, well, Jim Tucker is a medical doctor, and it's going to be some fascinating stuff because he's done a tremendous amount of research into reincarnation. You know, reincarnation researchers, actually, it's not done in a laboratory. They're actually investigators, more like detectives, and go out and investigate the cases very, very thoroughly.
Yeah, and I understand it's a worldwide thing. It isn't just a cultural American study, although I know he does want to get into that. But I understand it's a worldwide investigation he's doing.
Yeah, a lot of the cases come from a lot of other countries.
Right.
People in our country, a lot of people are not as convinced as they are in other cultures that reincarnation is a real phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand he did some work with Ian Stevenson as well, or some combined work, or he took over his work?
Yeah, Ian Stevenson has done, believe it or not, 4 decades of research.
I didn't know it was that long. Wow,
yeah,
40 years.
Yeah,
wow.
and Jim's very able successor.
Yeah, and I know that's a lot of questions, or that is a question that a lot of people ask about reincarnation. So we want to give you, the listener, you, the person who we're doing this show for, Signs of Life, courtesy of the Forever Family Foundation, an opportunity to be a part of the program. And this is how you can come along the ride with us and discover what science is talking about, especially about reincarnation, which I think is a hot button for a lot of people. You can contact us at 631-955-5400, 631-955-5400, or email us at radio@foreverfamilyfoundation.org. And we really do look forward to your help in discovering what Dr. Tucker has to say about reincarnation. On another topic, I had a very interesting discussion today with a woman who happens to be a nurse, an oncology nurse. And what I find amazing about nurses, my mother passed away from cancer and 2 years ago, and what I find amazing is the line that's drawn between a doctor and a nurse when it comes to talking about the afterlife. I found that many of the nurses, and I shared this with this nurse today, of how easily most of the nurses will talk about the signs that dying relatives will talk about as they recognize that they're approaching the end of this life. And that they're willing to talk about deathbed visions or visits from people that are on the other side, almost welcoming them to cross over. And this particular oncology nurse was awesome because she was very bold about it. I mean, she would talk about it right in front of the doctors, and the doctors would basically dismiss her. So I find it very interesting. We have Dr. Tucker on today, who's actually, and many doctors and scientists, very interested in understanding why is it that an intelligent nurse who's schooled and understands medicine could take that leap. And I believe it's because they see the signs right there. I believe it's because they see the proof when they see someone dying and they see them, this particular nurse, her name is Lori, and she said, I actually held someone's hand and had my arm around the other part of their shoulder as they were looking in the corner and stating, Mom, I see you. Mom, I see you. And she passed away. And when she shared that with the woman's daughter, she says, Mother's been gone for, 25 years. So what do you say about someone who is as reputable as someone who's a nurse that says, well, I know it's for real, I see a sign. So what is a sign, number one? And what do you say to the people who say, well, if I get a feather, that's not really a sign? How do you balance that out, Phran? Do you have any thoughts on that?
My initial thought, and I think pretty much everybody would have to agree with this, is that the people who are firm believers in something bigger in the universe have had these first-hand experiences. And it's not just the nurses. it's people all over the world.
Hmm.
And yet those are the people that are made to feel that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, and that's kind of sad in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and certainly in a hospital setting, it's the nurse that spends more time with the patient, and usually it's the nurse that's present, not the doctor when somebody is either getting ready to pass or has passed. So they have the direct experience, and oddly enough, a lot of cardiologists are now starting to get into the research because
Really?
they, because of the nature of cardiac illness and heart attacks, they are listening to their patients describe many experiences.
Or could it be that some doctors have such a stigma about their reputation that they're not willing to take that leap as a nurse would? And I really find that interesting when you talk to some scientists, that some of them, like Dr. Schwartz, has no issue whatsoever about getting off the fence and talking about his work in a way that he sees that there's something there. So I find that an interesting thing. I wonder if it's a stigma. But what would you say to someone, Phran, for instance, I have a friend who lost someone, and they're getting the pennies, they're getting the feathers, and then I have some friends who are actually seeing their loved ones in dreams. Do you think it's an underdevelopment of the spirit on the other side, that maybe they can only send pennies and maybe the other spirit has the ability to materialize?
Well, that's what we're kind of hoping science is going to help us find, those ultimate answers to those very pressing questions. Those of us who have had signs, be they the simple little penny that has the date of the person who passed that constantly shows up on the ground,
right,
versus the person who can see their loved ones regularly. And, we're not making these things up.
Right.
We have documents of people who tell these stories all the time. We want science to be able to say, this is the mechanism by which it works.
That would make it easier probably to facilitate them, I would think.
And while we're on that subject, there are a lot of people like myself. They very well may be, those pennies may be signs, and those feathers and those butterflies may be signs. But, I look for things that I can rule out as coincidence. I know people like to say there are no coincidences, but I think surely there are some things that are coincidences.
Really?
And when we come to signs, I want to see something that is that leaves no question in my mind that it's communication. So signs mean different things to different people, and proof of an afterlife means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And perhaps that's one of the things that we can ask our listeners about, what means proof to them.
But when you say, like, I know if someone's listening right now, they're going, well, if I get a sign, that's proof. What other things could there be besides signs?
Well, signs themselves have such a broad spectrum. Some are physical signs that manifest themselves with the energy-related phenomenon, like it could be lights that flicker on and off. It could be specific appliances that turn on and off inexplicably. They could be physical movement of things.
Okay, so there are different ways that signs can come to you. If we look at how the other side does communicate, wouldn't you say that there are examples right now in our everyday life, pardon me, that would actually support the other side? Like, for instance, we know we are on the radio right now, and we know that there's radio waves going through the air, and unless that person turns on that radio, raises that antenna, they can catch the wave of that vibration. So if we go on that theme, there's also microwaves, and there's other things in our atmosphere. For instance, dogs can pick up on whistles, and we can't. There's a certain frequency that some living beings can pick up on. So therefore, wouldn't that be proof that our loved ones are with us, but just perhaps on a different wavelength? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly there's an unseen world. You brought it up briefly. When the microscope was developed, all of a sudden we became aware of this microscopic world that we never knew existed. And today scientists take it one step further, a subatomic world, where quantum physics shows that many things are interrelated. So we are certainly living amongst many, many different worlds, and we're not always, we can't always recognize them, or we're taught by culture not to believe in anything that our five senses don't perceive.
Well, if there's a subatomic and this, microscopic, then where's the other side, Phran?
That's exactly where I was going with this thing, as Bob was explaining. The smaller and smaller we can break down the physical world, then it also raises the question of, is the universe out there, or is the universe within this tiny, microscopic, smaller and smaller world?
Interesting. So would that, knowing your science background, Bob, would that mean that's another dimension, or is that something different? Because some people talk about the other side being among us, but just in another dimension.
Well, I think it's very likely that we're just familiar with a few dimensions, but there could be 10 or 15 dimensions. Our loved ones that have passed could be literally on our sides, and we just some people talk about a sense of presence, and they're able to pierce that veil that separates the dimensions, and maybe people catch glimpses of these other dimensions at certain times, but not always.
Well, I think that's one of the burning questions that someone has when they lose someone is, how do I raise my vibration? How do I raise my vibration so that I can pick up on them and hear from my loved ones? And I think that that's a topic that we're going to be hitting on in the future with some guests. We're going to have some mediums on and some other scientists in the future. And later on in the show, we're going to talk about those guests that are going to be coming on. And really, we want to assist you on that journey of your questions of, how do I raise my vibration to reach my loved ones? So that's a future thing, and we certainly hope we have your involvement with that topic. So just let me run those numbers by you again, 631-955-5400 or radio@foreverfamilyfoundation.org. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Dr. Tucker will be with us on Signs of Life.
For years, people have been reporting communication from those no longer in our physical world. Historically, science and religion have taught us to ignore such messages. Yet, there is now substantial scientific evidence to the contrary. In response to this, the Forever Family Foundation has developed a sign registry to demonstrate the existence of this other dimension. On our website, people can register signs that they, after passing, plan on communicating to a specific loved one. Upon the registrant's passing, the stored information can be verified by the recipient of these signs. Participants will be taking part not only in a grand scientific experiment, but in providing the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that we survive our physical death. For more information, contact the Forever Family Foundation at 631-425-7707, or you can find us on the web at foreverfamilyfoundation.org. Or to register a sign, go directly to thesignregistry.com.
With the Nationwide Insurance On Your Side experience, you'll enjoy quality insurance protection, personal service, and our signature blue ribbon claims. Guaranteed fair, guaranteed fast. If you've got a home and a car, Nationwide has great news for you. Right now, you could save hundreds of dollars every year on insurance for both. To find out if you qualify, contact your local Nationwide agent today. You deserve a faster, more convenient way to meet your insurance and financial needs. That's why we're here. Nationwide really does provide an on-your-side experience, guaranteed.
To find out how much you can save on your auto, home, or business insurance, call us at 516-766-4025, 516-766-4025.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliated companies. Life insurance issued by Nationwide Life Insurance Company, Columbus, Ohio. Nationwide is an equal housing opportunity insurer. Products and discounts subject to underwriting review and approval.
Has your marketing pitch been missing the strike zone? Maybe you need a new player to help your marketing efforts. At L&RProductions.com, you'll find a team that can give your broadcast advertising the winning edge. L&R Productions has produced award-winning jingles, radio and television commercials for many businesses just like yours. Radio and television advertising work, but you need the right game plan. Make sure you're getting the most out of your ad every time it airs. www.L&RProductions.com. We'll throw strikes for your business every time.
Welcome back to Signs of Life, brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation.
And good evening and welcome back. I'm your host, Angelina Diana, along with my co-hosts, Bob and Phran Ginsberg, and we do have an exciting exciting guest on, and trust me, if you've ever had a question about reincarnation, about what happens to our souls, or the evidence out there, what the mainstream scientific world is looking at when it comes to do we come back, this is the man that you want to speak with. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest before we introduce him to the program. He's a board-certified child psychiatrist, directs research into children's reports of past life memories at the University of Virginia. He is also author of Life Before Life, which explores the evidence for reincarnation. I'd like to welcome to the program, to Science of Life, Dr. Jim Tucker. Hello, Dr. Tucker. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to have you with your vast experience and also the research that you've done into reincarnation. And I'd like to invite our audience, if you do have a question for Dr. Tucker, to call us at 631-955-5400. Now, Dr. Tucker, what made you want to write the book Life Before Life?
Well, this is work that's been going on at the University of Virginia for 45 years now, and it was started by Ian Stevenson, who has written a lot of scholarly books about the research and also published a lot in journals. But most people in the general public really aren't aware of it. So my feeling was, after 45 years of this work, it's time to let people in on it.
Wow.
So I wrote this book, and another motivation I had actually was to try to get more American cases of young children talking about previous lives. So I thought if more people knew about the work, then they could contact me.
That's a very interesting point, that the majority of the work that Dr. Stevenson has done has been outside of the U.S., correct?
Well, that's right. The cases certainly seem to be easier to find in cultures with a belief in reincarnation. So we found lots of cases in India, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and we have people looking for cases there. In the United States, of course, the idea is not generally accepted, and people seem to be less likely to tell their friends or tell other people if their children are making these statements. So we don't know if the cases are actually less common here or if it's just that people talk about them less. But even so, over the years, as some people did learn about Dr. Stevenson's work, he heard from a number of families, and he collected over 100 American cases, and then since we set up our website a while back, we've heard from over 100 another set of over 100 parents. So it's certainly a phenomenon that's out there.
So I guess it's a fair statement to say that having certain cultural differences, they may be more open to the concept of reincarnation. Therefore, children feel more free to speak about it. It's not necessarily that it doesn't exist in the United States.
Well, that's right, because it certainly does exist in the United States. In fact, we hear from parents who, frankly, are appalled by the idea of reincarnation, but they've at least been open enough to what their children are saying to contact us to ask us about it. So it's certainly not purely a cultural phenomenon. We don't know if our sort of culture in general sort of suppresses the cases, or if the cultures in Asia kind of produce cases, or if it's just, again, that we're less likely to hear about them because families aren't particularly proud here if their children are saying these things.
I understand. Now, what would be a typical statement that a child would make, say, not from the United States, because I'm curious if there's a difference. I'm jumping ahead with one of my questions, but I'm really curious about the typical statements that a child would make when they've had an awareness that they might have been reincarnated.
Well, a lot of them will talk about the way that they died in the previous life, and 75% of them will talk about how they died, and it's often by unnatural means. In about 70% of the cases, it's unnatural means, so either violently or suicide or drowning or something like that. So they'll often talk about, I used to be big and then I was shot or whatever, and some of them give a lot of details about it, enough where if they give the name of a location, then people can go to that place and see if somebody actually died whose life matches the details that the child gave.
Dr. Tuck, it's Bob Ginsberg. How are you?
Good. How are you, Bob?
Okay. I had a question. Some of the more interesting cases that you reported on involved birthmarks, and I know that it's fascinating when you think of how that could possibly happen, and I know that you raised an interesting explanation where possibly the consciousness of the past life leaves an imprint. Is that one plausible explanation? Is able to physically leave an imprint on a physical body?
Yeah, it can be a little complicated to think about, even if you believe in reincarnation, how a wound on one body would somehow show up on the next. But certainly Ian Stevenson has collected a lot of cases like this where the child would be born with a birthmark, even a birth defect, that seems to match a wound on the previous person, usually a fatal wound. And he wrote a book with over 200 of these cases, so it's certainly something that happens a fair amount. The idea that I think makes the most sense is not the wound per se on the body, but more the mental image that experience creates in the consciousness. So we know that, for instance, with hypnosis, there are certain subjects, if they're suggestible or susceptible enough for hypnosis, if they're good enough candidates, where you can tell them that you're burning them with some object, even though you're just touching them with your finger or something, and they will develop blisters or burns in that spot. Or there are people who will relive a traumatic experience and then develop marks that match that. So, for instance, there was this famous case of a man who relived an incident in which he was tied up, and he developed what clearly looks like rope marks on his arms. So those cases demonstrate that sometimes mental images can produce very specific lesions on the skin.
Well,
so, if the consciousness does continue from one body and then move to another, it would make sense that that specific mental image could produce a physical effect. And in this case, the consciousness is entering a fetus, so it could then affect the development and produce a similar mark to the wound that the previous person had.
I think it's plausible because we look at the evidence, for instance, in energy healing today, where somebody is able to project their thought, in essence, to affect physically another person as in healing. And then I also wonder if it works the other way too, assuming that there is another dimension or an afterlife. Perhaps we in the physical can send our thought imprints to discarnate entities. Maybe it works in reverse.
Well, he brings up an interesting point, because I'm very curious, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Dr. Tucker, about could it be possible, because I've heard from some mediums that some spirits can somewhat communicate with children so easily because children don't have the filters that adults have, and say the spirit looks at the child and goes, look, they have a mark like resembles as how I passed. So perhaps I can get the message that I'm still around through the child, and because the child's perception or the cultural society is reincarnation based, the child automatically puts it in their mind that it's reincarnation. Is there anything scientific that you rule that theory out in your work?
Well, you certainly couldn't rule it out, but it is different from what the children experience. I mean, they are experiencing events that take place from the vantage point of one particular person. And, they are saying, I did this and I did that. People... One option to consider is something like more or less possession, where the consciousness or spirit or whatever would enter the body after the child was born. Which if it were early enough, it's really hardly different from reincarnation. But who knows? There's so much about this, of course, that we don't know. There's far more that we don't know than that we do. But certainly from the child's experience, it certainly seems to them that the memories that they have in their minds are ones that they actually went through.
Do the children ever talk about the time that they spend before incarnating, the time between lives?
Some do, actually. Most do not. But there certainly are some that do. And the things that they say are certainly interesting. And I think it's worth at least listening to, considering what they say, because we have found from some statistical studies that we've done that the children who talk about time between lives are more likely to remember names and make more verified statements from the previous life than the kids who don't talk about time between lives. So it seems at least as if they have sort of a bigger dose of the memory that comes with them, so they have the talk about the time between lives. Some will talk about staying nearby either where the previous person lived or where the previous person died. So, for instance, Dr. Stevenson had a case of a boy where the previous person was a young man who was murdered. His body was dumped in a field, and then the boy said that he stayed in a tree above where the body was dumped for 7 years. Then said he decided he wanted to try to go home or something, and went to town, sort of got lost, eventually saw his future father, decided to follow him home, and then said it was on a rainy day, and then went home to be born to the next life. And it did turn out that the father had been in that area of the country during the time that his wife conceived, and it was on a rainy day when he was traveling through there, so there was at least some confirmation for that. Other kids will talk about going to sort of other realms or heaven or something like that. And we have found that the children in Burma in particular, where we looked at these cases carefully, their reports are quite similar to near-death experience reports from that area of the world. So, that's another thing that it's certainly worth considering. The problem, of course, is the talk about the other realms usually is completely unverifiable, but it's interesting to at least listen to anyway.
Yeah, especially if they can be similar among different children. Maybe that might prove some type of a continuity with that notion that there is another realm.
And there are similarities, but there are also differences. A fair number of the American kids, if they talk about it, will talk about being in heaven and looking down and choosing their next parents. So there are similarities like that, but some of the imagery, tends, frankly, to sound a little fantastic as far as, streets paved in gold or that sort of thing.
Okay. Now, do you find that there is a typical time period between reincarnation that's constant with the cases that you've looked at?
Well, it's not constant, but it tends to be short. The median time between the death of the previous person and the birth of the child is only 15 or 16 months. So we're talking about some very recent lives that these kids are describing. Now, there are exceptions. We'll get cases that are 50 years. If you get cases that are much more than that, it becomes usually impossible to verify. So, if a child's describing a life from ancient Greece or whatever, then, of course, that's really unverifiable. But the vast majority are describing very recent and very ordinary lives, just sort of people led normal lives. They may have died violently, but otherwise sort of nondescript people who usually live fairly close. And, then the kids are seemingly talking about them.
Well, that is so fascinating. And I do want to remind our audience that, he is looking for American cases. And I know that there are a lot of parents that might be listening. You don't have to use your name if it's too much of a stigma. As Dr. Tucker had mentioned that, there's some certain feelings in America about reincarnation. But if you do have a question, maybe something that your child has said, or you do have a question, you can give us a call at 631-955-5400. And we will be taking a short break. When we come back, Dr. Tucker will be with us still talking about reincarnation, and we might ask the good doctor if these cases actually prove reincarnation. We'll have more signs of life when we come back.
Has your marketing pitch been missing the strike zone? Maybe you need a new player to help your marketing efforts. At LRProductions.com, you'll find a team that can give your broadcast advertising the winning edge. L&R Productions has produced award-winning jingles, radio and television commercials for many businesses just like yours. Radio and television advertising work, but you need the right game plan. Make sure you're getting the most out of your ad every time it airs. www.lnrproductions.com. We'll throw strikes for your business every time.
With the nationwide insurance on-your-site experience, you'll enjoy quality insurance protection, personal service, and our signature blue ribbon claims. Guaranteed fair, guaranteed fast. If you've got a home and a car, Nationwide has great news for you. Right now, you could save hundreds of dollars every year on insurance for both. To find out if you qualify, contact your local Nationwide agent today. You deserve a faster, more convenient way to meet your insurance and financial needs. That's why we're here. Nationwide really does provide an on-your-site experience, guaranteed.
To find out how much you can save on your auto, home, or business insurance, call us at 516-766-4025. 516-766-4025.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliated companies. Life insurance issued by Nationwide Life Insurance Company, Columbus, Ohio. Nationwide is an equal housing opportunity insurer. Products and discounts subject to underwriting review and approval.
I would like to introduce you to the Forever Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide a forum where individuals and families who have suffered the loss of a loved one can turn for support, information, and hope. We believe in the continuity of the family, even though a member has left the physical world. The Forever Family Foundation is a joint effort of scientists, research mediums, and interested people who support the premise that life does not end with physical death. We wish to prove that the bond of the family cannot be broken even by death. We invite anyone who's trying to cope with the loss of a loved one to contact the Forever Family Foundation at 631-425-7707. That's 631-425-7707. Or you can find us on the web at foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Welcome back to Signs of Life, brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation.
And I'm your guest. I'm not your guest, I'm your host. Although I feel like a guest because it's so comfortable here in the studio. I'm Angelina Diana, along with our co-hosts Bob and Phran Ginsberg. And before we get back to Dr. Tucker, I just want to remind you and make an announcement that the Forever Family Foundation is going to have, and they're announcing their Holiday Pass raffle sales. They'll begin on Monday, August 7th. 10 winners will be drawn, each to receive a 1-hour free reading for the Forever Family Foundation Certified Medium. Chances can be purchased on the website at www.foreverfamilyfoundation.org. All proceeds go to further the goals of the Forever Family Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Jim Tucker back to Signs of Life. Hello, Dr. Tucker.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with us. I do have a caller on the line with a question. Could you take a question?
Sure.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Jeff to the program. He's from New York City. He has a question for Dr. Tucker about reincarnation. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for taking my question.
Go ahead, caller.
Well, I was just curious, there are so many different faiths that, I don't know about so many, but there are a number of different faiths that do believe in reincarnation. Are there any that are the faith itself is consistent with the data that has been collected in the work that you've studied?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think, even though we've been at this a long time, again, there's so much we don't know that we don't have the specifics of the process by any means. Certainly, even though many of our cases take place in areas with, for instance, Buddhism or people that believe in karma, our cases really have not provided a lot of evidence for karma. And as you say, there are different religions with various beliefs about reincarnation. There are some that actually still believe in heaven and hell, but it's just people get judged after multiple lives rather than just after one. the ones that most people are familiar in this country with are more Buddhist-based. But we really don't have the specifics from the research that can answer sort of which religion is more on target with it.
Thank you.
It's a great question. It might also be that stigma, too, right, that we spoke about earlier, that maybe that there could be more data if people didn't feel ostracized by talking about it. So it might not really be religious-based as the stigma.
Well, that's right. And as you mentioned before the break, I'd certainly be happy to hear from parents whose children have said these things. So if I can get in a plug, if they go to lifebeforelife.com, then they can connect with my email through that. And, we'd love to get some great cases that way.
And that's lifebeforelife.com. If there is anyone out there that would like to reach Dr. Tucker to express those things that might be happening, you are in a safe space with Dr. Tucker. He's done some incredible research about that. I do believe that we do have another caller on the line. Would you take another question, Doctor?
Of course.
Okay, I have Tom on the line. He's from Oyster Bay. He has a question for Dr. Tucker. Hi, Tom.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Say hello to Dr. Tucker.
Hi, Dr. Tucker.
Hello.
Your discussion about reincarnation brought up an interesting thought. I have an interest in mediumship. And say you have a person whose life, we'll call it life A, passes and then reincarnates to become life B. But if some of life A's loved ones are still around and were to go seek a medium, would that spirit be gone to them, or would there still be a communication or a consciousness of life A in the even though there's a life B going on simultaneously? I may be outside the realm of your research, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly can't give you a firm answer to that, but it's a very interesting question to consider. And maybe, actually, our host can answer that question better than I can, but I think that it's safe to say that the spiritual world, if there is one, is not linear the way that our world is and the way that we think about things. And it would not surprise me for someone to be able to sort of have a foot in both worlds and have a sort of a piece to communicate through a medium while also starting the next life.
Well, I was actually going to bring up the point of there's been some coined terms by other doctors called twin souls. Mm-hmm. Would that fall under that realm with your research, or have you had an example of that in your research?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the term, actually.
Well, I think twin souls is something that part of the soul reincarnates down, the other part is still on the other side. So some mediums think that's why they can somewhat communicate, even though there's been a short time in between reincarnation. So I don't know if there's been an example, let's say, in your studies where, say, the child that you're researching can somewhat recall the life of another child who's having the same reincarnation experience, therefore kind of showing that there's two souls.
Yeah, well, don't know about that, but we have people talk about soul splitting, and there are cases where more than one child has reported seemingly memories from the same life. Many of those cases are in situations where they're recalling someone in the village or the community who was very well thought of. So it raises the possibility of, whether the families are sort of encouraging them in subtle ways to make those claims. But those cases are out there, so they're certainly worth thinking about.
I just wanted to add, this is Phran, by the way.
Hey.
I just wanted to add that in the spiritual talk, there has been a concept of the soul having multiple levels to it, that it can still be on the other side and incarnate in various different lifetimes, and that there are many, many incarnations to the one soul, and yet the one soul is still intact on the other side.
Well, that's certainly possible.
but I'm guessing that your research hasn't shown that, Doctor.
Well, it's not that it's shown it or not shown it. It's just, those sorts of questions are very hard to get much evidence for one way or the other.
I understand. Now, when you're looking at your data that you collect, is there more data supporting your last comment, let's say, about maybe families kind of working together to encourage, or are you finding that there's actually evidence weighing that out?
Well, in a lot of cases, even in cultures with the belief in reincarnation, the parents actually can be rather discouraging of the child making statements. That's partly because there are a lot of areas where it's thought that if a child talks about a previous life, that either they will be sick or will die young. In addition, a lot of these children will, frankly, really pester their parents about how their previous life was better, and their previous parents had more money or whatever, and the parents get tired of hearing it. So there's certainly been a number of cases where the parents became quite punitive toward the children because of their statements, some of them even getting whipped for it. So it's certainly not generally the case that the parents are trying to egg them on and trying to get more out of them.
Yeah, I would encourage people to pick up Life Before Life. What they'll find is that a good part of the book are very specific accounts of these children who detail tremendous amount of evidence. And I know that Dr. Tucker goes in and investigates each piece of that evidence by trying either to find where this person claimed to live or to reunite this person with the prior past family. And it's a long, painstaking process, but the evidence is quite compelling. And following that, I know that you mentioned that a lot of these children all of a sudden stop talking about these past lives when they reach a certain age. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, that's right. They tend to start at a very early age. They're usually 2 or 3 when they start making these statements, and then by the time they're 6 or 7, most of them have stopped talking about it, and most of them seem to have forgotten about it and then just sort of go on with their lives. For one thing, that's the age where kids are starting school and perhaps getting fully involved in this life. But it's also the age where all children tend to lose their memories of early childhood anyway. So if there was a family friend that they knew by name when they were 2 or 3, if that person moves away, then by the time the child's 6 or 7, they usually, for the most part, they usually don't remember that person. So it sort of makes sense that as you lose your early childhood memories, you would lose the memories from the previous life as well.
Wow. We're talking to Dr. Jim Tucker, author of the book Life Before Life. And Dr. Tucker, we have quite a few calls. Would you mind taking another?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Wonderful. I'd like to welcome Linda from Wata on the phone. Linda, you there?
Yes, hi, how are you?
How are you, Linda? So nice to hear from
you.
Welcome to Signs of Life. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tucker.
Yes, hello, Dr. Tucker.
Hello.
In listening to you, I think you answered a few of my questions. It was regarding at what age do children lose the ability of the memories of their previous lives. And my question really was, is this like a physiological change that occurs in the child, or is it really just as you discussed? And for those children that you've studied, that you were able to confirm really some past life existence, do those children go on later on to keep any of that memory?
Well, some do. I mean, there are exceptions to everything. Just like there's some people who claim they remember having their diapers changed or whatever.
Right.
So some of the cases, the memories do seem to last longer, and in particular, the cases where a previous individual is identified as being the match and the families meet and start a relationship. In those cases, the children tend to talk longer, and presumably is that the talk around them as well as the meetings sort of keep the memories in the children's minds.
I see.
Very, very interesting question. Thank you, Linda.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'd like to welcome Melissa from Huntington on the program. She has a question for Dr. Tucker. Would you mind taking another one?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Okay, Melissa, welcome to Signs of Life. Hello.
Hi. A lot of my questions have already been answered, too, while I've been on hold. But I do have another one. Hello, Dr. Tucker.
Hello.
I find this topic fascinating. And I was curious about the age of the child when they do stop to talk about these memories. But it also rose another question in my mind. I work with children with disabilities, and some of the children have these, well, some have imaginary friends, but others also talk about their other families, other mommies, other daddies, and it seems that it's been interpreted by their families to be a disability. But now you're making me wonder if there's the possibility that, you know, the parents are overlooking this. I don't feel comfortable suggesting that, but in your research, was this ever the case?
Well, I think it's certainly worth considering. And, you know, if none of these cases had ever been verified where the child statements turned out to match someone who actually died, then it would be easy to assume that it's just fantasy on the part of the children. But in fact, there are a lot of cases where if they give enough details, including specifically names of locations, then people have gone there and found that, in fact, somebody did live and died that matches with what they're saying. So, you know, if the kids are talking about other families, it certainly could be fantasy. If they're also talking about how they died or something like that, then, you know, it's worth, I think, listening to it, and at least it being open to what the children are trying to explain.
Well, I'm fascinated by this, and I'll certainly check out your website and let you know if I get any further verification of this.
Oh, that would be great.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. That's really a very valid, interesting point that even frontline workers can run into this, too, when they do work with children. And to get that verification, that's very interesting.
Well, that's right, and we've had cases where the preschool or kindergarten teachers will think that the child is talking about somewhere they lived before, and then they'll ask the parents about it one day and learn that the child's never even been there.
Wow, that is interesting. Any cases like that in the U.S.?
Well, none that come to the top of my head, but I did recently study a case in Scotland where the boy was describing living on a particular island that he named, one near Scotland, and talked about it dozens of times or hundreds of times, and finally the teachers asked the mom about it and learned that the child had never been there before.
You know, I was talking with somebody today, and I promised I'd ask this question for them. Have you come across any evidence or any accounts from children where they claim that they were an animal in a past life?
Well, yes. Those aren't cases, frankly, that have a huge amount of appeal to me personally.
You have enough problems.
Well, as I told you well, that's true, but I don't mind the idea of maybe having been an animal in the past, but I don't really relish the idea of being one in the future.
That's a good point.
You know, those cases, I mean, are almost always impossible to verify, of course. But, you know, they're kind of intriguing, and I mean, you do get reports occasionally of a child saying they were a wild animal of some kind.
Well, I'll follow that question up with another one. What have you found to be the reaction of your scientific colleagues in the medical communities to the work that you do?
Well, it varies. When my book came out, Michael Levin of Harvard University gave it a very positive review. With Ian Stevenson's scholarly books, they got very respectful reviews in journals like JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, as well as American Journal of Psychiatry. So there are certainly people that are willing to take it seriously. Ian was chairman, actually, of the Department of Psychiatry here before he got involved in this research and had quite a successful mainstream career. So I think there were people that, you know, respected him, so they were at least open to hearing what he had to say about this. You never know who's going to be open to it and who's not. And there are certainly plenty of people who dismiss it out of hand, but, you know, then there are also people in various specialties where you'd never have any idea that they were open to this, but they are.
Now, speaking of being open to this, has this research changed your opinion about reincarnation?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I certainly come at this with an open mind. I had never really given much thought to the idea until I was sort of exploring different areas and happened to be reading one of Ian Stevenson's books when I saw that his research division, I was living in Charlottesville, his research division had gotten a grant to study the effect that near-death experiences have on the people who have them, and called him up to see if they needed help interviewing patients, and started volunteering, and sort of one thing led to another. But I certainly didn't come at this with a religious activist sort of point of view. I think, my book, in many ways, is sort of a greatest hits collection where I pick out the best cases of Ian's over the years, and then also a number of the recent American ones. I think if you look at the best cases as a group, the strongest ones we have, then the best explanation is that memories and emotions sometimes can carry over from one life to the next. So in that sense, it has certainly changed my view. It doesn't mean it's necessarily part of religious doctrine that I have, but it's something that I give a lot more thought to now than I used to.
So you're not exactly saying you believe in reincarnation, but it's certainly swaying you towards that.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to use the term carryover, really, because reincarnation has a lot of connotations that people associate with it that may or may not be accurate, and that our cases don't necessarily speak to. So I think they definitely provide evidence, again, that there can be carryover of memories and emotions from one life to another one. So I prefer to just sort of leave it at that.
Interesting. What advice do you have for parents who, they might have a child who's speaking in a certain tone that they might have had another family, or that they have a sense that they lived another life? What advice would you give to those parents?
Well, the first thing I can tell them is that these statements do not indicate mental illness. In several countries, we've done psychological testing of some of these subjects, and they tend to be quite bright, but otherwise they are perfectly normal kids from a psychological standpoint. I think it's certainly useful for the parents to be open to what their children are saying and to be respectful in listening to them, just like they are with other things that the children say. I don't think it's good to get completely wrapped up in it and start asking a lot of pointed questions about a possible previous life, partly because that may be upsetting to the child, but also a lot of pointed questions may lead the children to start making up things. It's certainly fine to ask sort of open-ended questions like, do you remember anything else, or things like that. I would encourage parents, if their children are making these statements, to write them down, because if the kids eventually come out with enough details where the story might be able to be verified, it would be very helpful to have those statements written down. For some cases where the children are very wrapped up in the memories and very emotional about them, it can be helpful for the parents to acknowledge the statements, but to also say, that may have happened to you in the past, but the past is the past, and now you're safe in this life, and you're here with us now, and we're going to enjoy this one.
And there's another thing they can do.
Yes.
They can go to your website.
Well, that's true, of course.
lifebeforelife.com, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if there is a parent out there that's had a child, or that has a child that has had these experiences, science really wants to hear from you. But the neat thing that I find about all the scientists that I have been honored to speak to is that they understand that we're still human in this lifetime, and that we have to recognize that we do have this life. And I think that that's a very important statement you made to parents out there, to have their children recognize that, that might have happened to you, but you have this life now and that you're safe.
Oh, exactly.
Dr. Tucker, I'd like to thank you so much for spending this time with us. Your work is fascinating. I want to remind our audience that his book is called Life Before Life. Where can they get your book? Is it available online?
It's certainly available online at Amazon or the others, and should be in the stores as well.
That's wonderful. That's Dr. Jim Tucker, Life Before Life. Thank you so much, sir, for spending time with us, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Well, thanks. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, well, that was absolutely spectacular. I can't tell you. I can't wait to listen back to that because he has such rich information about reincarnation, and that's the neat thing about the scientific world. I have to tell you, being a layperson, when I had found out that the science world was split up, there's medium research, there's reincarnation, there's deathbed visions. But when you get a chance to talk to these doctors, you recognize how much information there is about each topic, and that it would probably be difficult to have the scientific world wrapped up in every aspect about the science. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, and we talk about this privately sometimes, is that when you speak with a lot of these medical doctors and researchers and scientists, and you ask them their opinions personally, you get a little bit of a different answer than you do publicly.
Isn't that interesting? Well, speaking about the different aspects and the different scientists that there are, we have some interesting guests coming up in the future, and I know Bob's going to share some of the scientists and mediums that are going to be with us in the next couple of weeks.
Well, next week on August 10th, we're going to have Dr. P.M. Atwater, who has a rich history and research into near-death experiences, and she'll be telling us not only about the experiences and but what they imply. The following week, 8/17, will be special. We'll have a medium as our featured guest, Robert Hansen, who is able to bring through incredible evidence that can be verified, and that'll be real interesting. And the week after that, Sally Rhine Feather of the Rhine Institute, which also has a 50-year history of studying things such as ESP and telepathy.
That is absolutely spectacular, and we'd like to hear from you. So if you do have a question about near-death experiences or how a medium works, you can contact us at radio@foreverfamilyfoundation.org. We're almost out of time, but I know we have some exciting events coming up. The Holiday Pass Raffle, which on the 7th, you'll have your opportunity, right?
That's when they're going to be posted to the website. People will be able to buy their chances right on the website. And if you're a member, and membership is free,
wonderful,
you will be getting direct mail via the newsletter and flyers on that as well.
Absolutely. And you get a chance to get an hour reading from one of the 10 mediums that are volunteering their services. Well, that music means that it's time to wrap things up. And again, on behalf of the Forever Family Foundation, the Other Side, and our wonderful guest that was here today, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And it's your opportunity to learn more about this work and to learn how the other side really is only a heartbeat away, and science is going to prove it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
I would like to introduce you to the Forever Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide a forum where individuals and families who have suffered the loss of a loved one can turn for support, information, and hope. We believe in the continuity of the family, even though a member has left the physical world.